Imagine waking up one morning in a country you've called home your entire life, only to find that you no longer belong. This is the reality faced by countless individuals of Mexican descent during the 1930s, an era marked by the Great Depression when economic turmoil turned communities against one another. The U.S. government, in a misguided attempt to address unemployment and economic hardship, scapegoated Mexican Americans, forcing them out of their homes and into a painful exile. It's a chapter in American history that's often overlooked, but it deserves our attention. Around 1 to 2 million people of Mexican heritage were either forcibly removed or pressured to leave the U.S. during this time, and shockingly, about 60% of them were U.S. citizens. Can you imagine that? Citizens, people who had every right to be there, uprooted from their lives, their families torn apart, their livelihoods destroyed, all because of systemic racism and fear. Families were rounded up, often in the dead of night, subjected to raids and intimidation. They were sent to Mexico, a place many had never even visited, stripped of their homes, their jobs, their very identities. Now, let's draw a parallel to another dark chapter in our history, the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, around 120,000 Japanese Americans were forcibly relocated and incarcerated in internment camps. 2/3 of them were U.S. citizens, just like those caught in the web of Mexican repatriation. The government claimed it was a matter of national security, but in reality, it was driven by racial prejudice and unfounded fears. Families were uprooted, businesses were lost, and lives were shattered. Both events reveal a disturbing truth about our society. When fear and prejudice take the wheel, civil liberties can be tossed aside. In both cases, systemic racism led to the denial of fundamental rights. The Constitution, which promises protection to all citizens, was ignored. The pain inflicted upon these communities was not just immediate, it echoed through generations. The economic and social damage was profound, leaving scars that would take years, even decades to heal. But here's where it gets even more complicated. The Japanese internment has been acknowledged, apologized for, and reparations were offered. Yet the Mexican repatriation remains largely unrecognized. Why is that? Why do we allow one group's suffering to be validated while another's is brushed aside? This lack of acknowledgement only compounds the injustice, leaving those affected without the closure they deserve. It's essential to recognize the distinctions, too. The internment of Japanese Americans was a centralized federal action sanctioned by executive orders. In contrast, the forced removal of Mexican Americans was often decentralized, carried out by local and state governments, relying on informal coercion. This difference in approach doesn't lessen the impact. It merely highlights the varied ways systemic racism can manifest. Both of these events serve as painful reminders of how fragile our civil liberties can be, especially for marginalized communities. They illustrate the importance of vigilance in the fight for justice and equality. We must remember these stories, not just as historical footnotes, but as lessons that can guide us today. As we navigate our current landscape, let's not forget the past. Let's ensure that history doesn't repeat itself, that no one is forced to feel like a stranger in their own home. We owe it to those who suffered to keep their stories alive, to advocate for justice, and to strive for a future where every individual, regardless of their heritage, is treated with dignity and respect.